I'm a 31-year-old female who is really into Halloween, like incredibly into Halloween. I was never allowed to celebrate when I was younger because my parents always told me that it was a gateway into devil worship. It really sucked not being able to go out with friends that night. I was jealous when I saw everyone else decorating for the spooky holiday, but I was just sitting at home reading the books my parents approved of and doing the activities they allowed, like homework and cleaning. I mentioned all this so you understand why my obsession became a little overboard into adulthood. I guess I was making up for lost time. My parents and I had a falling out when I was in my early 20s, when I finally had the courage to mention to them how much I hated my childhood. They never understood what they did wrong and thought my upbringing was as perfect as it could have been. I resented them, and by the time I was 25, I decided I no longer wanted them in my life. All I ever got was criticism from them, and all they ever wanted was to get away. So I did. I packed my bags and moved to New York. I had already graduated nursing school and been working for about a year at that point, and had chosen an apartment close to the hospital I'd be working at. I never really thought that I'd be a nurse, but my friends decided that that's what they were going to do, and being the follow-the-leader type person I am, I went along with them. I ended up actually loving it, though. I'm very much a people person, so that aspect of the job really appealed to me. Blood and other typically gross things people think of that come from the human body never really freaked me out. The feeling of getting to help people and make them feel comfortable in an otherwise uncomfortable situation was always such a big reward at the end of the day. While working at the hospital for about 4 years, I'd eventually gotten to know the man who would eventually be my husband very well. His name is Mark. He was working as one of the attendings at the hospital at the time. When he finally asked me to marry him, I was so happy. It had taken him 4 long years to finally pop the question, and I was honestly even a little shocked when he finally did it. When the time came around to begin planning the wedding, I was adamant that we have our wedding on Halloween. Originally, I wanted it on Halloween and with a theme to match the day, but Mark said the theme was too much, and I had to settle for a normal, traditional wedding on the actual day of Halloween. I thought that was a pretty fair compromise, given that it was our big day and not just mine. I was able to sneak a few pumpkins into the decorations, but I figured he wouldn't mind. The day came, and I was so excited. I didn't invite my parents, and if I did, I'm sure that they wouldn't have come anyway, since they never left the house on Halloween. It makes me laugh even writing that because it's so ridiculous, and they'll never see it. When we pulled up to the venue, I was completely shocked. They had gone totally all out with the Halloween decorations. It looked incredible, like everything I had originally wanted. My first thought, though, was how scared I was that Mark would think that I had done it. It turns out he surprised me with the wedding I originally suggested, and it was amazing. When I walked down the aisle, I noticed everyone was even in costume. During the reception, people made toasts while staying in character with what their costumes were. It was hilarious. After about an hour went by during the reception, a loud crashing sound was heard coming from the catering tent. Everyone looked over to try to see what had happened, and that's when we all saw one of the waiters come out clutching his stomach as his shirt began to stain with blood. People began laughing and cheering. Even I did. We were at a Halloween-themed wedding. We figured it was part of the show. I thought it was something my husband had arranged. One of the other waiters came running to the man's side and screamed at us to call 911, but it just made everyone cheer and whistle more. It became so loud that I couldn't even hear what the guy was saying. I got out of my seat and made my way closer to the crowd of people now surrounding the 2 very convincing actors. They had started throwing money on the 2, and the poor guy taking care of his friend had begun to cry and just kept saying, please, as everyone applauded them for their dedication to their role. After around 5 minutes went by with no change in what was happening right in front of us and a large pool of blood now spreading around them, the wedding goers seemed to get bored, and I watched as they started to walk away. I made my way to the front of the crowd and knelt down to let them know that they could stop now. The guy holding on to his friend looked me in the eyes, his own wet with tears, and said, "You don't understand. I've been trying to tell everyone this whole time. This isn't a joke. We aren't acting. This is real, and my friend's bleeding out on the floor, and nobody does anything to help him." I was shocked. At first, I didn't believe him and started to crack a smile, but he insisted. He told me he would have called the police, but he had to stay with his friend. He didn't know what would happen to him if he left him with a bunch of people who thought he was faking it. It kind of seemed like he was just panicking, and that's why I screamed at the top of my lungs for everyone to be quiet and for the music to stop. I called my husband over and relayed the situation to him as he immediately went into doctor mode. He cut the man's shirt off, which exposed a very large and deep laceration in his abdomen. Thankfully, 911 was finally called. All we could do was put pressure on the wound and hope that our stupidity and lack of common sense wouldn't cost this poor man his life. My husband rode with him in the ambulance as police sectioned off the scene to try to figure out what exactly happened and how that guy had gotten so badly injured during the reception. As far as we could tell, it was an accident. No one else was in the catering tent with him. They were, however, very concerned with the fact that it took 8 whole minutes for the police to be called, 8 minutes while the man was bleeding out on the floor and everyone watched and even cheered. That night was spent waiting for news on the man's condition. He ended up needing surgery and spent multiple nights in the hospital. He was expected to make a full recovery, though, and was actually really understanding about what happened that night. It turns out he managed to cut himself on one of the knives in the catering tent. He wasn't sure exactly how, and said when it happened he was more just focused on getting help as fast as possible. He said it was really unfortunate timing on a really unlucky night, but he didn't blame any of us for thinking it was an act. He actually laughed about it, saying how of course that was his luck. We have stayed in touch with him, and after talking to him, he told me that he was okay with me telling the story as long as I didn't share his name or any way to identify him. He's doing a lot better now and even owns his own catering company, although now he does refuse to work on Halloween night. My wife and I got married in the Church of the Hofskirkja in Iceland in 2015. We invited all of our close friends and family, including the family that neither of us really liked because that's just what you're supposed to do. My wife Mika has this estranged aunt, Lucy, that no one in her family is really close with. She used to have serious drug problems, which spiraled her down a path that led to a rift between her and the rest of the family. Well, Aunt Lucy was invited to the wedding, and when she showed up, she surprisingly came with a date. But unsurprisingly, he didn't look like the kind of guy you want to bring home to mom and dad. Right from the first time I laid eyes on him, I knew he was different, not in a pleasant, quirky way. After the wedding ceremony, of course, came picture time. The bridesmaids, groomsmen, and my wife and I all went to this nice backyard section of the church campus to have pictures taken by the hired photographer. Some close family from both sides came along as well to watch, while most others went to the party hall. Lucy and her boyfriend came to watch us take pictures as well. This was when I first got his name Tom. The two of them were making everyone uncomfortable. Like, everyone in the bridal party would joke around and we genuinely laughed, then either Lucy or Tom would yell out these weird, inappropriate things. They just kept doing it to the point where they created awkward silences, and all of us were just internally cringing, dreading what weird things they'd say next. It got very awkward very quickly, to the point I wanted them to leave altogether. Anyway, we eventually finished with pictures and migrated to the party hall connected to the church where food and drinks were being served. Being the groom, all the attention is on you at all times. You barely have a chance to sit down and gather your thoughts or even eat. Every second, I had someone else coming up to congratulate me, and eventually that person was Tom. He shook my hand again, his breath terrible and his arms scarred up. He wasn't wearing a long-sleeved shirt, rather a stained gray polo. He seemed like a filthy person all around. He started talking to me with this loud, almost demeaning tone. I did my best to just be polite, and eventually, he walked back to Lucy. This was the last time I saw him that day. Eventually, I saw Lucy sitting by herself at the table, so I asked Mika where that Tom guy went. She had no idea either. After a while of Lucy sitting by herself, Mika went up to her to ask her where her date was. Lucy didn't know she hadn't seen him in an hour. Lucy also explained that they met in rehab and that she had only gone out with him 2 times. Mika grew concerned with this man being here after hearing this. We asked our parents and some close family to look around for the man to confirm if he was still there or not. There was some concerning news when one of my relatives said that some of the gifts in the room where the gifts were being stored were missing. We immediately attributed this to Tom and had an employee ask over the microphone for everybody to keep an eye out for Tom. Lucy wanted to call his cell, but she couldn't find her phone. This put a slight damper on things, but we didn't let it ruin our wedding day. Our parents called the police and dealt with them on the side, with the help of Lucy giving information about Tom. After the wedding reception, a few close friends came back to our hotel room for a little after-party of sorts. Lucy texted Mika asking for our home address because she had to drop off her gift that she forgot to give. Mika responded, and then our good time was interrupted by a distressing phone call from Lucy's phone number. Mika turned off the music and put it on speakerphone. There was a male's breathing on the other end, horror movie-like, as if he was trying to creep us out. Mika kept asking where Lucy was to no avail. Eventually, the person on the other end hung up. Mika called her grandma, who was the only one close enough with Lucy to know where she would be, and she confirmed that Lucy was staying with her for the night. Lucy got on the phone and said she lost her phone at the wedding and didn't know her Apple ID or password, so she couldn't even track it with Find My iPhone. Our best guess was that it was that Tom guy. We were now concerned that he knew our address and that we weren't home. We were too drunk to go home, so we asked my dad to stay there for the night and watch the house. He gladly did so, and the next morning, he woke up to texts and missed calls from my dad. He said someone kept tapping on different windows of the house as if to be messing with them. He called the police, but they didn't find anyone. That same day, we went to the police station to see what could be done about pursuing Tom, who we suspected was the one behind all of this. But without video cameras catching the thief in, and given that Lucy's phone had been turned off or destroyed, there was little to nothing the police could do. Lucy told us that she and Tom had gotten into a verbal argument, and that he blamed us for whatever she was saying. He thought we didn't like him and, in his words, we sabotaged him. This just further led us to believe he was responsible for that weird phone call and coming to our house in an attempt to scare or harass us. We never saw or heard from that Tom guy again, and we have only started to further distance ourselves from Lucy after that. Weddings are stressful. Too stressful. I just wanted to elope, but my wife refused. She wanted a huge, all-out, super expensive wedding, and even though I could afford it, that was literally my nightmare. I guess she and I were the opposite of each other, but the term opposites attract really did apply in this situation. I had never loved anyone the way I loved her. Anyways, I agreed to the extravagant big wedding on one condition: I got to pick the food. She didn't like that at all, but I stood my ground and told her that it was the only way that she would get what she wanted. Eventually, she agreed, and that started the journey of trying to find the perfect food for the big day. I knew that it had to be something to cheer me up, given the whole day was going to be the opposite of how I'd hoped. I went to multiple restaurants that served all different types of food, but choosing was proving to be a lot harder than I had planned. About a week before the wedding, my soon-to-be wife, Ella, asked me what I had ended up choosing for the wedding. My heart sunk, and I could feel my face getting red when I realized that I had completely forgotten to make a decision at all. I couldn't even look at her when she asked me a second time after I failed to respond to her. I knew she knew, though. After her fourth time asking, my fourth time not saying anything, she lightly slapped my shoulder and, with a voice that could stop traffic, said, "You didn't make a decision and reserve a caterer, did you?" I was so embarrassed, but I also wasn't about to prove her right. I was stubborn, and her need to be right all the time was almost as important as my need to prove her wrong whenever I could when it came to little stuff like this. I looked her in the eyes and as calmly as I could informed her that I had decided that we'd be eating Thai food on the night of our wedding. She seemed unsure about my answer, but that seemed good enough to get her off my back for the time being. She made it clear that she wasn't too pleased about my choice in food, but she didn't think that I would come through at all, so she was just happy that I chose something. That night, I told her that I'd be joining her in bed a little late because I had some stuff to attend to. In reality, that whole night was spent searching for a last-minute Thai caterer that hopefully I could call in the morning and book for the wedding. When morning came, I called 5 different Thai restaurants and asked if they could do it. They all said no, but the last one gave me the phone number to his aunt and said that she made great Thai food, and he was 90% certain that she could prepare enough food for the wedding with her family's help. I was skeptical at first, but I had no other options. There was no way I was going to tell Ella what was actually going on, so I called her. She told me she could do it, but it would cost around $10,000 for the short notice and the amount of food that she'd be making. It was a large wedding, and she told me that she'd have to get her brothers, sisters, and children on board with cooking to be able to finish it in time. After we hung up, I was actually pretty optimistic. The big day came, and I can't lie and say that I wasn't dreading it. I knew Ella would love it, but I also knew that I would hate it. But I was willing to do anything for her, even put up with the wedding and reception that were the opposite of what I would have wanted. The Thai food was dropped off at the reception venue early in the morning, and the wait staff was instructed on how to go about serving and reheating it. When I went to check on how everything worked out, it looked amazing. My wife even commented on how proud of me she was for coming through with what I had promised. It was time to eat, and everyone really enjoyed the food. It was worth the huge expense, and I felt pretty good about myself at that moment. But that feeling wouldn't last. After around 6 hours since the food had been served and toward the end of the reception, my wife came to me complaining of an upset stomach and told me that if I needed her, she'd be in the restroom. I figured it was a coincidence that my sister had come to me complaining of the same thing too, but I brushed it off. I could only brush it off for so long, though, until my own stomach began to hurt. I started to sweat, I became nauseous, and was desperate to find the bathroom. When I found it, I realized other people were having the same problem too. The line for the bathroom was at least 30 people long, and it just kept getting longer by the second. Even the porta potties outside had lines. That's when it began. I watched in horror as almost everyone who was attending the reception began to projectile vomit in every direction. These people were so sick and weren't even trying to aim away from each other. There were literally hundreds of us filling this venue, throwing up in every direction. It was covering the floors, the walls, the tables. The large room filled with the stench of the insides of people's stomachs. It was so bad, I remember my eyes began to water and my nose was even burning. I felt myself needing to throw up as well, and before I knew it, I was adding to the pool of sludge under my feet. It was like a scene from a terrible horror movie, and for a second, I thought maybe I was having a nightmare. At some point, someone ended up calling an ambulance and most people that had become sick elected to be taken to the hospital. I knew what had happened though. I immediately knew it was food poisoning and I didn't need a doctor to tell me that buying food from a random Thai lady who cooks in her own home maybe wasn't a good idea. I had unintentionally poisoned all these people. I couldn't help but feel bad as all these sick people were carted off to the hospital. Most ended up actually testing positive for E. coli. Some spent a good amount of time in the hospital and some went home that same day, but the outbreak was so big that I had to fess up. I told the police exactly what had happened. Unfortunately, some of the wedding guests most affected by the food poisoning did opt to sue. Myself, my wife, and the woman who cooked the food were held responsible for what had happened that night and were ordered to pay a large amount of money, which I won't disclose here, to the large list of guests that joined the lawsuit against us. The woman who cooked for us and her whole family were found to be illegal immigrants and were subsequently deported after their immigration status became known. My wife wouldn't even look at me for almost a week and wouldn't sleep in the same bed as me for almost a year. For a while there, I thought that she was going to divorce me for what I did. It's been around 6 years now and I learned my lesson. I feel extreme guilt every day for what had happened. I really should have just let my wife make the decisions. Being stubborn really doesn't pay off. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to watch the latest videos.